Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Humanities, SOH. Diploma in Creative Writing in English, DCE. DCE 03 Short Story. Block-1 Basic Elements of a Short Story. Unit-2 Atmosphere. 2.0 Aims and Objectives. This unit will introduce you to the concept of atmosphere in a story. The term is used to describe the dominant mood as created by the setting, description, and dialogue. You will see, after attempting the activities, that both physical and psychological effects can be created by evoking an appropriate atmosphere alone. At the end of this unit, you will be able to identify the functions of atmosphere in a story, and create the desired atmosphere as well, depending on the theme and plot of your story. 2.1 Introduction. Atmosphere is a part of fiction, whether long or short. It enables a writer to establish lifelikeness and win the reader's willingness to accept the world created by the storyteller. Atmosphere is as necessary for fiction as it is for our planet. Life forms and characters would not be able to survive without it. Atmosphere is, therefore, one of the basic elements in a short story. It creates the mood as well as the psychological and physical effects appropriated to the theme of the story. By setting a story in an appropriate time and place, you lend it verisimilitude and authenticity. Atmosphere binds the story together, sets the time frame past, present or future, creates the psychological mood in the reader, and establishes the locale. Thus, atmosphere helps the writer in creating the texture of his imagined world, with its characters, locale and environment. 2.2 The imaginary world of fiction. Fiction basically centers around the lives of imaginary characters and imaginary situations. Some of the elements that contribute to making this world authentic and lifelike are descriptions of time periods, of geographical locations, of people, their actions and their conversations. However, one of the most important elements in a story is atmosphere. This, along with the theme and the plot, is what certainly makes up a story. 2 February 2001 Setting it in time. Any work of fiction has to be set both in time and place if the story is to sound authentic. Most fiction nowadays deals with the present, the recent past or the imaginary future. In all stories, the time setting must immediately be recognizable, due to reasons of space. Take for example, the following passage. Switching off the air conditioner, he leant back and stared at the blank screen. Hopelessly, he even turned a few knobs, waiting for a picture, any picture, to appear. He rotated the antenna and pushed the set at a new angle. Now he had missed the opening of the Festival of Russia. Do you need to be told that it is the very recent past that's being talked about? Again, read this. The spaceship had taken off just a minute ago. The bushes were still shaking and the dust hadn't settled down. Now he was stuck, for good, on this unfamiliar red planet since the next space shuttle would land there long after his energy tablets were finished. Clearly, this deals with the future when interplanetary travel will become a reality. Historical fiction, of course, requires its period setting, costumery and the use of language current in that period. The prejudices, modes of thought and beliefs of the time would also have to be given due consideration. If the story deals with a futuristic era, its physical and intellectual realities will have to be spelled out. George Orwell, writing about an era 36 years ahead of him, gives us the nuts and bolts of life and a system of government as he envisaged in his novel 1984. He, however, wrote the novel in 1948. There is a whole body of utopian literature, starting with Thomas More, where writers have given a detailed setting to an idealized future as they see it. Thus, whether the setting of the story is in the past, the present or the future, atmosphere invariably plays an important part. 2nd February 2002 Setting the locale. A fictional world always has to be set both in time and place. While a novel has considerable scope for creating atmosphere, the short story is, however, handicapped because of its length. A novelist can build up the locale at leisure and give his characters lengthy pasts, detailed ancestries and legacies, a description of their school days, their first loves and even the emotional crisis of their childhoods. But a short story writer cannot afford to linger on the past for too long. His brushstrokes have to be economical and yet evocative. All references have to be to the point, and revealing even a cursory glance must reveal the place of action. The reader does not always have the patience to wait until the last page to be told that Delhi, or London, or Singapore is where it all happened. For example, take Balthazar by Lawrence Durrell. The lion dust of desert, prophets' tombs turned to zinc and copper at sunset on the ancient lake. Its huge sand falls like watermarks from the air, green and citron giving to gunmetal, to a single plum dark sail, moist, palpitant, sticky-winged nymph. The Poseries is dead among its tumbling columns and sea marks, vanished the harpoon men. Merkoti under a sky of hot lilac. You will notice how the place setting is evoked: the desert, the Mediterranean and a ruined civilization. 2.3 Functions of atmosphere. The atmosphere of a story, as we understand it, could, with a little stretching, perform the following functions. It binds the story together, sets the time frame, creates the mood, provides the background, and thus makes for economy and authenticity, two essential qualities of every good short story. 2nd March 2001 It binds the story together. Let's consider a situation. A number of people, from different places, find themselves in a haunted house. No matter what each one does, the prevailing atmosphere will color his emotions and actions. This may explain how atmosphere can bind a story together. 2nd March 2002 It sets the time frame. The same group could have been trapped in Bhopal, in December 1984, when the gas leakage killed thousands. The atmosphere of panic, fear of the unknown, and lack of antidotes would set the time frame more effectively than pages of statistics. 2nd March 2003 It creates the mood. Read this passage. And then the sights and scenes they passed on the streets, the congestion and racket of the varied traffic, the virulent cinema posters, the blazing colors of women's clothing, the profusion of toys and decorations of colored paper and tinsel, the radios and loudspeakers never tuned to less than top volume, and amongst them fleur sellers, pilgrims, dancing monkeys and performing peers. Don't you notice that the mood of the person observing the above scene is critical? Now read another version. And then the sights and scenes they passed on the streets were so new and exciting. The eager crowds, the profusion of color and sound, and then the lovely, unusual flowers, the sedate pilgrims, the dancing monkeys and the performing bears. Now we confront a different mood of joy, eagerness and excitement. 2nd March 2004 It establishes the locale. Fishing boats and nets, the smell of the sea and, above all, the smell of fish, and you know that it is a story about the seacoast. Smoke, flashing lights, throbbing music and dim figures. There's the atmosphere of a discotheque, of course. 2nd March 2005. It makes for economy and authenticity. The atmosphere, once established, clears the way for the writer to go ahead with his story. Mulk Raj Anand is a down-to-earth storyteller who, on the face of it, has no time for redundancies like atmosphere in his short stories. Nothing is put in obtrusively. Take, for instance, the story Birth, about a stonebreaker's wife delivering on the road. Right in the beginning we have an image of kikar trees which look like gins in the early morning. It is a cane thorn tree he has referred to and not a flowering gulmohar or a laburnum. The flashbacks are to the point: her husband Ramu putting his ear to her belly to hear the child stir, and her dying mother-in-law holding her ill-omened daughter-in-law guilty of every ill that has visited the family. Her sufferings end in triumph, for she delivers a son on the roadside. An entire way of life of a stonebreaker's family is evoked here in a few pages, the mood stark and unsentimental, though human, and the atmosphere authentic. The atmosphere creates the overall background and gives authenticity to the tale. However, it must be remembered that a single false note in the narrative cannot only destroy the atmosphere but also the reader's willingness to accept an imagined world on which the structure of fiction rests. A small detail like an incongruous name can create disbelief in the story. For instance, in the short story The Moment of Eclipse, Brian W. Aldiss has a Parsi woman called Sushila. Again, in Aldiss's story, Orgy of the Living and the Dying, Tancred Fraser's Muslim mistress is named Sushila Nayyar. A story loses credibility immediately when such mistakes are made. Activity 2. Here is a passage from a story about the freedom movement that led to Indian independence. List details about the dress, the mood and the locale that give it authenticity. Khadi was the uniform that all wore with pride, notwithstanding its weight and its shapelessness. At the very first sight of the tricolour, a lump came into their throats and they vowed that it should one day fly at the ramparts of the Red Fort in Delhi. Leela and her brother had already forgotten what having a comfortable bed and a retinue of servants was like. The Indian summer was at its peak when the first stirrings of check your answer with the list given at the end of this unit. 24. Some story types where atmosphere is important. There are some kinds of fiction in which atmosphere is everything, the period novel, and the ghost story. 2nd April 2001. The period novel. In certain types of fiction, atmosphere plays a very strong role. For instance, in the late 18th century English novel, the ghost story and fiction was cited in exotic lands. This novel, known as the Gothic novel, depends for its interest mainly on atmosphere: moss-covered castles and abbeys, pointed Gothic arches, wild torrents, thick forests, desolate heaths, mouldering chapels and sepulchres. The atmosphere of the novel is often full of a sense of danger, and a threat hangs over everything and everybody. A ruined castle with its dark corridors and vast rooms, rotting woodwork and ancient servants, such an atmosphere often engenders a feeling of fear and mystery peculiar to this kind of novel. Again, fiction set in the Renaissance period in Europe would have to take notice of the Anglo-Spanish rivalry on the high seas, the obsession with voyaging and discovering new frontiers, the supremacy attached to man and his capacity for reason, the historical consciousness, the intensive cultivation of the arts, the idealistic vision of man and society, the threat of papacy among Protestant nations, inquisitors, centering at the state, etc. All this, or much of it, has to be brought into the story either through light, suggestive touches or through heavier brushstrokes, in order to construct that minimum framework of credibility which passes under the name of lifelikeness. 2nd April 2002. The Ghost Story. The ghost story is another form where much effort has to go into the evocation of the mood: a lonely house, strong winds and rattling shutters. And, of course, you should have some mist around because ghosts are supposed to look like wisps of mist, aren't they? Not many Indian writers have attempted the ghost story. Khushwant Singh's The Mem Sahib of Mandala is about Disan and his family staying at a forest rest house formerly owned by Jean Mem Sahib. In the evening, the tropical jungle was hushed into an airy stillness as the twilight sunk into night. Now the jungle was alive with a different variety of noises, the croaking of frogs and the calls of jackals and hyenas. At night Mrs. Disan sees the footprints of the ghost, Jean Mem Sahib, leading almost right to her grave. A jackal cries out each time her ghost is seen. The atmosphere is built up how? By half. On the final night, when Disan fires at the ghost and accidentally kills himself, one comes across the usual accompaniment of lightning, thunder and a downpour. 2nd April 2003. The abstract or the dreamlike story. Indian short stories have not branched off into the abstract and the dreamlike. 1. Needs to study the stories of such masters of modern fiction like George Louis Borges to see how they manage to create a particular atmosphere in their stories, mainly by giving the minutest of details in regard to the most fanciful of fictionalized places and trass. For instance, in his story The Immortal, Borges sets out to turn a concept into a story, namely that immortality is a desiccated existence which has lost thought and speech. To prolong life is to prolong agonies. The river of immortality lies in the deserts inhabited by troglodytes, serpent devourers who are ignorant of verbal speech, and garamans who hold their women in common and give them the flesh of lions to eat. The effects that Borges conjures up through his descriptions of weirdly styled architecture, labyrinths, deserts and exotic places need close study. 2.5 How atmosphere is created. Some examples. Atmosphere can be created through detailed description of the setting, through economical touches in which the tale and the setting blend, or through piling up of details. 2nd May 2001. Detailed description. Take for example, this passage from Balthazar by Lawrence Durrell. Summer, buff sand, hot marble ski. Autumn, swollen bruise grace. Winter, freezing snow, cool sand. Clear sky panels, glittering with mica, washed delta greens. Magnificent starscapes. And spring. There is no spring in the delta, no sense of refreshment and renewal in things. One is plunged out of winter in talks wax offigy of a summer too hot to breathe. Note how the author has created the atmosphere of the delta and the starkness of it all. 2nd May 2002. Economical touches. Reread our discussion of Mulk Raj Anand's story Birth, 2nd March 2005. The writer desires to create an atmosphere of pain and deprivation. He does so, with the minimum use of words, only because he highlights the details which build up the necessary tension. There is no contrasting picture, lay, of anticipated joy, to dissipate the feeling of depression. 2nd May 2003. Piling up details. Atmosphere can be created through piling up of details. While a particular kind of atmosphere can be conjured up just by a touch, the same effect can also be produced by the piling up of detail. Take Anitha Desai's story, Scholar and Gypsy, which deals with an American sociologist, David, and his wife Pat, who allows the Indian heat to beat her. The glazed eyes and the drooping head tell us in the first 2 sentences how she feels. Bombay takes over from here coconut shells. Betel stained walls, fish scales and lepers' stumps. She finds the people so large and vital and forceful in their brilliant clothes and with their metallic voices and their eyes that flashed over like barbers' shears, cutting and exposing, that she feels crushed rather than revived. 2.6 Summing UP. In this unit you were told about one of the basic elements of a short story, namely atmosphere. Atmosphere has 5 major functions in a story. It binds the story together, sets the time frame, creates the overall mood, establishes the locale, and makes for economy, lending an air of lifelikeness or authenticity to the story. Thus, when you write a short story yourself, pay great attention not only to the events in it but also to an appropriate atmosphere. This is because most stories derive their strength from the atmosphere evoked by the writer. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.